best-selling LGBTQ+ author with his children's book, Johnny the Walrus, which is at johnnythewalrus.com, and he did not pay me to say that, which tells the tale of a young boy who tries to transition into a walrus with the assistance of his confused mother. He is also the star of one of the most downloaded documentaries, What is a Woman?, which seeks to answer a question that could only be seriously asked in our unserious time: what is a woman? He also is an author and has written several books, including Church of Cowards, which challenges the complacency of Christians within our secular society, and The Unholy Trinity, which is regarding the left's assault on life, marriage, and gender. Lest I risk being canceled, let us welcome Matt Walsh.
Thank you. Please don't start with the standing ovation, because it sets the bar too high for me. So I was originally asked to speak at this conference about a year ago, and the topic was, at the time, meant to be religious liberty, a very important topic. A lot has changed in my life over the past year. So I think instead of speaking directly about religious liberty, as crucial of a subject as that certainly is, I want to share some thoughts about the fight that I have spent much of the last year, and well before that, immersed in. And that would be the fight over and against gender ideology. And gender ideology is, of course, the insane, destructive cult which has taken over our culture. It is the belief that gender is fluid, that men can be women and women can be men, that there are in fact countless categories outside of man and woman, and that all the things that humanity thought it knew about biological sex and human identity are all somehow wrong. This is the force of evil that I have recently dedicated much of my life and my time to combating. We released, as was mentioned in the introduction, we released one major counterpunch in this fight a few months ago with a documentary called What is a Woman?, which documents my journey across the country and even halfway around the world to confront this belief system and expose it for the inherent incoherent madness that it is. And along the way, we spoke to college professors, we spoke to doctors, we spoke to therapists, we spoke to politicians, we spoke to sex change surgeons, we spoke to feminists at the Women's March, and many dozens more. We even traveled halfway around the world to Kenya. We spoke to tribesmen living in mud huts. We went to other areas of the third world as well, like Los Angeles, for example. This adventure and the resulting film is one major prong in our sort of counteroffensive. Another happened more recently. So a few weeks ago, we published a report about the transgender clinic at our local hospital in Nashville called Vanderbilt University Medical Center. And in the report, we tried to sort of tell the story of how Vanderbilt got into the gender transition game and why, and what this sort of quote-unquote medical care actually entails. And it's a story which, in a very similar form, has played out all across the country at countless hospitals and medical clinics all around the country. So the story begins with a doctor at Vanderbilt who, as she boasts in a video recorded several years ago, convinced Vanderbilt to start offering, quote, gender affirmation care because, in large part, as she explains, it's very financially lucrative. It's a big moneymaker, she said. Now, why is it a big moneymaker? Well, because it is a complicated procedure to mutilate a patient's body in that way. And best of all, as far as she's concerned, there are a lot of follow-up appointments. Translation, a transitioned patient is a patient for life, and so you get to keep reaping the financial rewards from them. So Vanderbilt was convinced, and they began offering their castration and mutilation services and reaping the financial rewards. But what happens if not every medical professional on staff is willing to participate in the butchery? Well, to handle those troublemakers, there was another doctor at the hospital who told assembled staff members in another video that we unearthed that if they conscientiously object, if they cite their religious liberty as a reason why they don't want to do this, it will be, as she said, problematic. Indeed, she said there are consequences to such decisions. You shouldn't work here if you're going to do that or not do that. And if that veiled threat was somehow too veiled, they came up with a sort of a big brother-like surveillance system to watch the doctors. And they called this their Trans Buddy program. Trans Buddy is an activist who volunteers to attend appointments at the hospital with trans patients. And the activist is there to watch and to babysit the doctor and report on any crime he might commit, such as misgendering, or if his affirmation of the transgender's self-identity is not enthusiastic enough. That's going to be reported to the higher-ups. Now, Vanderbilt made these Trans Buddy hall monitors available to all trans patients, including minors, because, yes, of course, Vanderbilt also got into the business of transitioning minors. As we revealed in yet more videos, Vanderbilt began offering puberty blockers to children, which are drugs that chemically castrate them. They offered irreversible cross-sex hormone treatments to kids as young as 13. They were castrating and sterilizing kids, and that's not all. They also began performing top surgery, which is cosmetic double mastectomies, on kids as young as 16. And this, again, is happening all across the country, including in this very state. So we released all this to the public, and it immediately caught fire, and Vanderbilt panicked and took down the website took down the whole website for their trans clinic, just took it away. It was too late. The light was turned on before the cockroaches had a chance to scurry out of view. The public saw what was happening, and they recoiled in horror. They demanded accountability. They called for change. Our state legislators heard their cries. We started working together to craft legislation to ban these practices in the state, as far as when they target minors. And the tide was turning, and we were winning. But if history has taught us anything, it's that evil does not just fold up its tent and walk away quietly. That's not the way it works. And this evil, the trans agenda, gender ideology, which I believe is one of the greatest evils that mankind has ever known, certainly will not go down without a fight. If you oppose it, its legions will come after you, and they'll come after you hard. So at the beginning of this week, 3 of the largest medical associations in the country, to include the American Academy of Pediatrics, sent a letter to the Department of Justice calling for the arrest and imprisonment of, me, not just me, and they know better than to mention names, but they said that, quote, high-profile personalities who are spreading misinformation and inciting violence against gender clinics must be investigated and prosecuted and punished to the full extent of the law. They mentioned Nashville as one of the places where these anti-trans terrorists are operating. And what they were really saying, quite transparently, is that those of us who are exposing their horrifying Frankenstein-like medical practices must be silenced. The defenders of this evil want us to be thrown in prison. In fact, they'd like to do a lot more than that. They'd like to get rid of us completely if they could. When we released our documentary months earlier, back in June, trans activists responded to that by just simply threatening to kill me. Posted my address online, pictures of my house. People started driving by my house where I live with my pregnant wife and 4 kids. We had to have 24-hour armed security around our house. And the thing is, we actually had the security posted before the movie came out because we knew that would be the reaction. And these are just physical threats. The other thing that gender ideologues will do, along with threatening your physical safety and your freedom, is they will ruthlessly attack your reputation through smears, lies, defamation. I've personally experienced this in a rather severe form recently, but in some ways I have it easier because I work in conservative media where it's my job to be outspoken. The average person working an office job or attending school, living their daily lives, will tend to be more isolated and more vulnerable and won't have a platform with which they can defend themselves if they come under attack. So I've heard from countless people who tell me that they feel they have to remain silent about this issue because if they speak up, they fear that they will lose their jobs, they'll lose their friends, they'll lose their families even. As we were going around to various cities and filming and talking to people on the street about this, the vast majority of the people that we stopped and tried to talk to wouldn't talk to us on camera about it. And they told us why. They said it's because it would ruin my life. And to be clear, they were saying it would ruin their life to say on camera something like, only women can have babies. That would ruin their life. So I think this demonstrates a few points that I believe are relevant to this conference and everyone in attendance and everyone across the country. The first is that gender ideology is a totally pervasive, cancerous evil which is viciously guarded and protected by the darkest forces of hell. So let's focus on the pervasiveness of it for a moment. Now, this is not, as conservatives like to sometimes reassure themselves, strictly the province of gender studies professors and weirdos on TikTok, many of whom are gender studies professors anyway. The basic tenets of gender ideology, that gender is fluid, that people can decide for themselves whether they're men or women, that transgenderism is a valid and healthy state of being which should be affirmed and encouraged. All of these basic tenets are things and beliefs, however half-baked and incoherent, that can be found everywhere in the country. Stop any average person on the street, no matter what they look like or how old they are, and they're likely to talk about gender in ways very similar to how a gender studies professor would talk about it. Now, they may not realize who they are parroting, but they are parrots nonetheless. They have adopted these beliefs or pretended to. Anyway, pretended. Beyond the average adults walking down any average sidewalk, the most powerful institutions in this country are fully in thrall to this mania, particularly the case among medical, pharmaceutical, psychological industries, and within education. In my film, I talked to a therapist who was ready to affirm me as a woman because I confessed to enjoying scented candles. And in my defense, I only enjoy the manly scents, like leather and wood chips, I don't know. I talked to a pediatrician who refused to even agree, she would not agree, that only female chickens lay eggs. And she wouldn't agree with that because, as she told me, she doesn't know the chicken's gender identity. I talked to a college professor who called me condescending and rude because I said the word truth in his presence. And the thing is that these people are not fringe within the institutions they represent. They are utterly standard issue, commonplace. And through these institutions, these ideas are fed to the public, dumped out, maybe I should say, onto the public, like a vast sewage line. Of course, children are the most susceptible, as many children in our country today are indoctrinated into the gender cult practically from birth. They're put on the path to identity crisis, mutilation, and despair before they even are out of diapers. They're exploited, indoctrinated, lied to, drugged. They are chemically castrated with drugs meant for cancer patients. I asked that same pediatrician about the drugs she gives to children, and she threatened to get up and leave the room if I tried to talk to her about it. She called my questions malignant and harmful. To even ask her about it is malignant and harmful. Now, the effect is that trans identification among the youngest generation has increased 20-fold over previous generations. Overall, 20% of Gen Z identifies as LGBT, 20%. Among their grandparents' generation, the number is 0.8%. In fact, LGBT identification has almost exactly doubled in every generation for 5 generations and counting. This is all by design. I mean, it cannot be a natural biological process. Unlike what we're told, the defenders of this will say that, well, no, there have always been this many trans people in the world. It's just that they were not being affirmed, and so they were too afraid to come out and announce themselves. This is what they claim. They'll say that, even 200 years ago, there were millions of trans people. It's just that none of them would say so because they were afraid of society, and society wasn't very affirming. Well, the problem with that claim is that the same people who say that will also tell you that the consequence of not affirming a trans person is that they'll kill themselves. This is the emotional blackmail that's used against parents to get them to go along with having their kids castrated and mutilated. Well, hang on a second. So if you're telling me that throughout history there have been millions and tens and maybe hundreds of millions of trans people who were not affirmed, and you're also telling me that trans people who are not affirmed will kill themselves, then I should be able to look back through history and see an unbroken, centuries-long epidemic of people killing themselves mysteriously, especially kids. And what we find is that that is not the case. In fact, up until recently, a child committing suicide was almost unheard of. It didn't happen. And now it happens all the time, directly in correlation with the rise of the transgender movement. So our children face a very sophisticated and coordinated and vast indoctrination campaign. I'll never forget the words that were said to me by Scott Nugent, who's a woman who as an adult transitioned to be a man, or rather transitioned to appear to be a man, as she herself puts it. And her experiences with transition have been hellish. They've been so bad, in fact, that the complications from the surgeries will one day kill her, and she knows that. And now it's her mission to warn other people against falling into the same trap, especially children, and that's the part that haunts me, because she said to me, you know, it got me at 42. Your child doesn't stand a chance. And for many children, she's right. The statistics prove it. And keep in mind that as the LGBT club expands generationally, so it expands alphabetically, adding new letters to the initialism every year. New categories of identity are plucked out of the ether and presented to us, and we're supposed to just accept it. And many times these identities become redundant. They're just relabeling things that we already had labels for. So just one example that maybe this would be news to many people in the room, it was news to me when I found out about it. One of the new LGBT identifications is called demisexual. And if you're wondering what a demisexual is, that's someone who needs to be emotionally attached, or needs to have an emotional connection with someone in order to be attracted to them. And I hear that and I think, oh, so you mean women, in other words. Okay. So every woman in this room, you get to be, you're on the flag now, whether you like it or not. In the film, I interviewed a therapist who was once trans-affirming, so-called, but has now backed away from that approach, and she saw how far things had gone and how far down the slippery slope we had fallen, and she stepped away from the affirming strategy. She told me about kids in school who identify as cats and are thus affirmed as cats. And if that sounds like an exaggeration, well, I actually interviewed a man who identifies as a woman and also as a wolf. I assume as a female wolf. Although if he identified as a woman who identifies as a male wolf, that would be interesting. Anyway, I regret that he would not provide me a demonstration of his wolf howl, but that's how he identifies. And it's absurd, and we laugh at the absurdity until we realize what lies underneath it. And what lies all the way underneath it, at its foundation, is an attack on truth itself. The ultimate goal of the gender ideology agenda goes far beyond gender. The ultimate goal is to undermine, destroy, and erase truth itself. This is relativism. It's the belief that there is no objective truth, there is no shared reality. There are no universal facts that we all must conform around and submit ourselves to. The relativist claims the right to invent his own universe for himself, even to the point of inventing himself. He seeks to be a self-created being, making and remaking himself as he sees fit, right down to the biological level. He believes that his ego overrides everything. Everything must bow before his ego. Language, institutions, science, even his own DNA must take a back seat to his ego, to how he feels about himself or wants to feel. This is why in the film I found myself speaking to Pontius Pilate over and over again, asking, what is truth? It always comes down to that with the gender ideologue. What is truth? Whose truth? Which truth are we talking about? I was sitting in the same room as them, but I could not get them to agree that we were situated in the same reality. So we can share a room physically, but we cannot share a universe because everyone gets their own. That's why we're mistaken, if we believe that all of this started, 5 or 10 years ago. It didn't. The roots of modern gender ideology can be traced all the way back to the 19th century, as far as the author Carl Trueman explained in my film. The stage was set with the birth of psychological man, as philosophers have referred to it. And that is when human beings began to prioritize their own emotional well-being above all else, and to see emotional contentment as life's primary aim and purpose. So man moved away from defining himself based on his roles and responsibilities within larger social structures like the family, the church, the nation, even the workplace. This is how all people saw themselves all throughout history. If you ask someone to tell you about themselves, they would have immediately started talking about their family, what they do, the things that they do, the people that they relate with. That's what they would have told you. And now if you ask someone to tell you about themselves, they start talking about their feelings. It's the first thing that they go to. This is the grand stage upon which the gender ideology drama played out, and that really began to take its current shape in the mid-20th century, thanks to the work of two hideously evil crackpots named Alfred Kinsey and John Money, who together, along with a few others, shaped gender ideology as we know it today. But really, if you want to, you could trace the roots back further than the mid-20th century, even the 19th century. You could trace it all the way back to the fall of man, to the entrance of evil into the world, to the first act of rebellion against God. And that brings me to my second point. That given that this is an assault on children and on innocence and on truth itself, given that this is a threat which seeks to destabilize human civilization, eating away at the fundamental bedrocks of society, given that the stakes are so high and that those who enter into this fight risk being ripped to shreds for it, that is all the more reason why the church has to take a leadership position on this issue. The church has to lead. In other words, it must do the opposite of what it's doing right now. Now, with some notable and admirable exceptions, pastors, leaders in the church, leaders of the Christian faith, raised the white flag on this issue before the fight even started. Now, I think I can personally count on one hand the number of times I have heard the assault on gender mentioned or even alluded to by someone from the pulpit. The shepherds of the flock seem to live in their own universe too, a universe where this grave existential and spiritual threat, this attack on truth itself, doesn't exist. Now, if you're a parent of a young kid, you live with this reality every day and you're terrified of it. You're terrified of the day that when your adolescent daughter comes home from school and says, "Guess what, I'm a boy." It's happening to millions of parents all across the country every single day. And yet for so many Christians, they go to church and they never hear it mentioned, not once. We know the church has failed to lead on this issue because if they had been leading, we wouldn't be in this position to begin with. Our children wouldn't be falling prey to this cult by the millions. Our society wouldn't be spinning untethered in the darkness, not knowing which way is up and which way is down. But it is. When it comes to our film and the other work we've been doing on this issue, the most common response I hear from the average person is, "Thank you for making this. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I had no idea it was this bad." So many people have been caught off guard. Why? Because the people they depend on to alert them to these evils failed. They didn't do their jobs. Another reaction I heard to the film from people on my side is that they appreciated it and they liked it, but they wish that I hadn't been the one to make it. There was a prominent Lutheran pastor who made a video when the film first came out, making this exact point. He said, "Yeah, that Matt Walsh movie is good. I just wish that Matt Walsh wasn't involved." And why? Because I'm too political, I'm too divisive, I'm too harsh, I'm too controversial, I'm too polarizing. I'm not educated enough, I'm not eloquent enough. I'm too much and not enough all at once. And I agree, actually. All of those criticisms are valid. That's all true. I am indeed too much of some things and not enough of others. So why did I make the film? Well, because no one else did. Because no one else did. Now, it's not just me, of course. There are a lot of, well, I'm not going to say a lot of people, but there are people who have stepped into the void because the leadership is not coming from the places where it ought to be coming from. Two of the most effective opponents of gender ideology in the country right now are names you may or may not be familiar with. One is a journalist named Christopher Rufo, and then there's a woman who runs a Twitter account called Libs of TikTok. Now, neither of them are Christian pastors. In fact, the woman who runs the account she's not Christian at all. I'm not a church leader either. Yet, this is who it's been left to. Now, if any leader in the church would like to come to the front lines, we're more than happy to make room for them. I will step to the side. I will. And there are a few up at the front already. Not nearly enough. Not even close to enough. You know, John 21 tells us of a conversation between Christ and St. Peter. 3 times Christ tells the apostle to tend or feed his sheep. Church leaders are not feeding us when they serve up a bunch of cliches and platitudes while avoiding the urgent issues we all have to confront every moment of our daily lives. The sheep need something real. I mean, we need to be guided. We need to be taught. We need to be empowered. We need to be called to repentance. We need to hear about sin and redemption and heaven and hell. We need to hear about the real things that are happening. We are confused. We need explanation. We need to be told how to navigate the spiritual minefield of modern culture. We need something to hold on to, something we can think about as we return to our lives after church on Sunday. If you're a leader in the church, we need you to lead. And on this particular issue, we need you to stand up and say, transgenderism is a lie. There are only men and women. Our biological identity is given to us by God, and it's a beautiful and wonderful thing which we should cherish. That is what we need to hear. Third point, final point, and here's the good news. I give a little bit of good news after all the doom and gloom, is that the truth will win. Okay, in the end, the truth will win. Eventually it will. And you get little victories along the way. Yesterday we got the news that Vanderbilt, in response to the public pressure sparked by our report, is pausing all gender transitions of minors at the... And the thing even better than that is that they sent a letter to state legislators, and they said in their letter that they intend to comply with whatever laws or regulations are put in place governing these procedures. In other words, they conceded the legislative fight ahead of time. They surrendered. They surrendered. Now, there's still a lot to do. I mean, there's so much to do. But the point is that truth does win. We've been promised as much. That's all the more reason to stand up and take the lead, get on the winning side. And the other good thing is that gender ideology in particular, although it is insane and destructive and poisonous and pervasive, it is also beatable. We can win because the other side can be crushed under the weight of simple questions. That's all I did in the film that we made. And I have seen this happen before my eyes, time and time again, where the learned and the educated, the experts, the very smart people who run this country really, crumple and collapse and panic in front of me. I mean, just a bumpkin in a flannel armed with a high school diploma. Now, is that because I'm brilliant? Well, that may be my preferred adjective in how I self-identify. But no, fortunately for me, there was no brilliance required. All we have to do is just stand up look this thing directly in its face and ask it questions. Serve it a healthy dose of skepticism. Force it to explain itself. Put the burden of proof back on the other side. You know, for so long, when the left has come along with these ideas about gender and saying things that are in direct contradiction to what we all know to be true, and not only that, but are in direct contradiction to the things that all people have known inherently since the dawn of man, and then they come along in the last 15 seconds, and they want to throw all of that away. And if we don't want them to throw it away, then we have to explain to them why we shouldn't. No. That's not how it works. You're the one coming along in the last 15 seconds trying to throw away everything that we all know to be true. Burden of proof is on you. You explain yourself. I don't have to explain it. You explain it. And it's the same thing if you come to me as a man and say, you need to refer to me as a woman. And if you're not going to do that, you have to explain to me why you won't respect my pronouns. Nope. You explain to me why I should. Why should I participate in this lie with you? Why is that my responsibility? You want to see yourself as a woman, you're not. Why should I have to participate? Explain to me that. Explain to me why I should have to participate. That's what the skepticism is. That's what the questions are. Flipping the burden of proof around. You need to explain it, not me. But what we find is the gender ideologues are weak and scared and vulnerable. They have perched themselves on a limb that isn't even connected to a tree. They're anchored in nothing at all. Their worldview is empty and frail and flimsy. We don't need to be armed with anything but a spine. That's all it takes. Enough to stand up straight and ask the questions that cannot be answered. The questions that, for that reason, are not supposed to be asked, but must be. Now, people say to me all the time, do you really want to die on this hill? You want to die on this hill? Is this the hill you want to die on? Well, the answer is yes. I will die on this hill. Because if there's any hill worth dying on, it's the hill of truth, of objective truth. If we surrender this hill, then there's none left worth defending. And so when I hear from people that are supposedly on my own side who say, well, we don't need to, let's just be polite and go along and let's not get involved in people's business and we don't need to argue about this. There are more important things. My response is always, where do you go from here? So you want to give up truth to be polite. Where do you go next? What's left? What's left after you've given up truth? Give up reality itself. What's left? But though I am willing to die on the hill, I don't want to, and I don't plan on it. I plan to win, and we can win. But the church needs to stand up, and now is the time. Thank you.
Yeah, you will. So just as before, if we can have everybody sign up or line up for questions for Matt Bumpkin, Walsh. And then also, if anybody saw the film, there's a cliffhanger at the end where you actually reveal who the brains behind the operation is. So can everybody give a rousing applause for Mrs. Walsh?
She was really hoping nobody would do that, but she couldn't get away with it. And by the way, as I mentioned, my wife is pregnant. We're expecting twins. So, and that's our second set, by the way, our second set of twins. Yeah. So, I won't be sleeping anytime for the next 6 months, so this is as sane as you're going to see me. All right, questions?
Hi, my name is Carlene, and I'm really old. So I remember when my daughter was 2, she is now 51, watching the Phil Donahue show one day. And there was a transitioned man to a female who was all garishly dressed as a female, kind of an odd interpretation to me, a female.
Sorry, she's my mother. I can help out.
That's true. Anyway, and my little 2-year-old said to me, "Mommy, that lady says she was a daddy." And I just said, "Oh, let's watch a cartoon." But you know, it was going on back then. And at that point in time, the way I remember it is it was recognized that were underlying psychological issues to this problem. And these people at that time were allowed to be treated. My understanding is that today, therapists cannot treat for this. And so I'm thinking these people are victims in some way because they don't get the help that they need. What can be done about that?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. You've pointed to the change that happened over the last few decades in the psychiatric world. And now you're absolutely correct that what's expected is the affirmation model, which of course affirmation is the exact opposite of therapy. And there are still some people in that world that are willing to say it. Jordan Peterson would be one. He's in my film, and he as a clinical psychologist, he could say better than anyone that's the opposite of therapy. It's not my job to just affirm whatever you come to me with. No, you have problems. I'm trying to help you work through them. And so we've just flipped that on its head. What happened was that there was a fundamental change where when we first started hearing about this transgenderism or transsexualism, early on it was seen that, okay, there's a problem in the brain. We got to help someone with what's going on in their brain, in their mind. And that's correct. There is a problem in the mind, and we do have to help people. But then, sometime in the 90s, they decided that no, the problem's not in the mind, it's in the body. So rather than changing the mind to conform with the reality of the body, let's change the reality of the body to conform with the sickness in the mind. And so that is what has happened. And the answer is to go back to what we did before. It's not to just abandon people to their delusions. No one wants to do that. I have immense sympathy for people who struggle with this. I can't imagine not being able to accept the fact that I'm a man. I can't imagine that. But we need to love them and guide them towards the truth. That's ultimately the answer, I think. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I'm Genevieve Marnin. I actually work with Right to Life of Michigan, or the pro-life people. But I wanted to ask if you were aware of what's going on in our state. I know you're not from Michigan, but we have this diabolical Proposition 3 that's trying to be ushered into our Constitution. And what people don't realize, and I want to bring it to your attention because it's a Trojan horse. They're using the emotion around the Dobbs decision and the abortion issue to usher in, cloaked in this abortion thing, a gender ideology. This will allow gender-confused children to be sterilized and mutated without their parents' knowledge or permission. So I would love it if you could highlight that, because I think this is the model for the rest of the country, and we are ground zero for a test case here. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Yeah. I was not aware of that particular measure, but I'll certainly look into it. And that's the thing where in Nashville, we're focused on Vanderbilt, but that's just one little battlefield in the overall war. And this needs to become a nationwide movement. So I'll look into that, yeah.
Prop 3 passes, we will be the first state in the nation with a constitutional right to gender reassignment surgery for our children without parental consent. So it's a big deal, and yeah. I think the rest of the United States needs to know what's going on here.
They do.
Thank you.
That's total madness. Thank you.
Hey, I'm Tyler Hammock here. I Got a question for you. With the fantasy football going on and the Daily Wire host, have you accepted Michael Knowles' bet yet?
Yeah, we do have a fantasy football league that we do at the Daily Wire, and supposedly I'm being told that I had a bet with one of the other hosts, Michael Knowles, for our last matchup, and I lost, and I haven't. But we never decided what the bet was. The overarching bet is that whoever comes in last place in fantasy football, the punishment is they get courtside tickets to a WNBA game. That's the punishment. And so it's going to be me. I'm going to be the one at WNBA. So that's why I'm going to have to do that. I'm punished enough. And that's it. That's all.
He's pretty adamant that you haven't accepted his bet yet. He's waiting for it, though.
Well, he's going to be waiting a while, you know.
Sweet Daddy Walsh, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
Handsome and
I
brilliant.
have to say there are so many people in the room that are confused right now by why you just said that. And we're not going to explain it to them. We know the rules.
Nope.
Yeah.
Handsome and brilliant are definitely understatements. You are both entertaining and inspiring. I love how unapologetic and uncancelable you are. Your response to Media Matters the other day was perfect. Thank you for speaking the truth rather than just sitting around and complaining about it. You go out and start movements, which is very inspiring also. All of that aside, I think the biggest question on our minds today, well, maybe just mine, is now that Ben has surrendered the giant stuffed walrus, what is the status? Were you able to get it home? What was your wife's reaction? Are you building an addition to your home to house this conversation piece?
I am so glad you brought that up. So just quick background, when my book, Johnny the Walrus, came out, people in the company decided to get together and for a surprise for me, and they purchased an enormous stuffed walrus that is the size of an actual walrus. And for some reason, they never gave it to me. It was just hiding in storage back in the studio somewhere. And I found out about it. I demanded that I be given my stuffed walrus. And that was a whole drama. And finally, they did give it to me, but it is not yet at our house because my wife is insisting that there's nowhere to put it in our house. So this has been a subject of great debate amongst us. And I say, how could there be no place for a walrus in our house? The house that Johnny the Walrus built, you're telling me a walrus? And this is awesome. This is so great because we've had this discussion, and usually it's just me and her talking, and I don't have a microphone, so I'm at a disadvantage. There's nothing she could do right now. So, do you all agree that I should be able to bring the stuffed walrus home? Do you? Okay. All right.
Thank you. SBG for
Thank
life.
you. Thank you for that.
SBG for life, Sweet Baby Gang for life, for those who don't know what that is. I was gender dysphoric in college, and I grew out of it. So if anybody wants to talk to somebody who has experienced gender dysphoria in some fashion, I would be happy to speak with anybody afterwards. Curious, the credibility of your platform depends upon the health of your family life, like your marriage, your parenting, etc. How is the Daily Wire helping its creators to maintain that health?
That is a good question. You know, I not to let them off the hook, but I guess I never really thought of it as of that as a responsibility of the Daily Wire. I see that as sort of my responsibility, and my wife. You know, this is up to us to do, and it can be, no matter what you do for a living, you have distinct challenges that come with it, and so we certainly have our distinct challenges, and just in the amount of hours required and the attention that comes to us, and having lunatics show up at our house wanting to kill us is also a challenge at times, only slightly exaggerating. So, but I do see that. I see that as something that we work on. I don't really see that as, I don't look to my company to kind of do that for me.
Sure. Well,
So-
Rod Dreher is another conservative commentator, Rod Dreher of the American Conservative, and he recently, his wife and he have divorced, and now he's moving out of the country, and so, it's been a real downer to those of us that have followed him, for example, for a while, to see his life fall apart after he's done so much work for the family and for children and everything in his work. And so just, keep the faith, keep it healthy.
That is very sad, and it's also a reminder to those of us who do this for a living that we're very invested in the problems of society, and we're thinking on such a grand scale all the time, and you can get lost in that and actually forget about the problems that are closest to you. And we know that that's where you have to start is with the problems that are closest to you. Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, guys, we're going to have to take a quick break. We're going to resume. Stay in line if you wish. We're going to resume with the panel discussion. We're going to take a 10-minute break. But a quick question, walrus questions? Are this your normal?
Not usually, but I'm enjoying this.
Well, welcome to Heartland.